I'm Ariel Azor, host of Right This Way, and today we're going to talk about cancel culture. So recently, with all of the protests that have spread not just throughout the US, but throughout Europe and Canada as well, we've seen a ton of canceling people for things they've said in the past, comedians especially, for wearing blackface or for making jokes using the N-word, especially for anybody that's not black. A lot of that. And then we've also seen a lot of disturbing statues or monuments, and not just disturbing and painting on them and, smashing them, but also, pushing statues off into the ocean. We've seen so much of this, and it's a really great example of cancel culture. We don't like it. It doesn't fit the narrative that we want to push, so let's get rid of it. And a lot of people are like, whatever, it's a statue. The guy was a slave trader, you've got to get rid of it. I don't think we should have a statue for a slave trader if it's a statue of him trading slaves, right? That's super racist. That's not something we celebrate as a culture. That's not a part of our history that we celebrate. It's a part of our history that we should remember, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But it isn't a part of history that we celebrate. So let's start with the statues. When we look at these statues that people are tearing down and are so angry over, is it really what they say it is? Right? So you tear down this statue and you say he was a slave trader, he was a horrible person. What else did he do? That's my first question. Does it make it okay that he traded slaves? No, of course not. It's not a good thing. It's important to remember history and to understand how things went down. Because when we look at these statues and we see slave trader, horrible person, get rid of him, he was a racist. Hold on. There's a lot of people who traded slaves, who owned slaves, who did nothing to help people in slavery, because it was culturally acceptable at the time. And African Americans were not the only people ever enslaved in this country or in other countries, or oppressed in this country or in other countries. But again, historically, which slavery oppression, which group of people do we learn about? We learn about African American slaves in America. Absolutely. And I'm not saying, again, that it's any less important or more important than other times that people have been enslaved or anything. It's never okay. But historically, it's a fact that it happened. And it's really dangerous when we forget how it happened, why it happened, what allowed it to happen, and most importantly, what stopped it from happening. See, what's going on right now is people are going around and they're saying, they're looking at the color of their skin and they're saying, you're white, you're racist. You're white, you don't have an opinion on this. You're white, so you have to go do this. And then they're doing the same thing, black and white people, but what they have in common is that they're all liberals. They're going around and they're saying, you're black? You can't think what you think. You can't vote for Donald Trump, you're black. Joe Biden said it himself. If you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Why is that okay? That's what's happening right now. People are going around looking at the color of their skin and saying this, and this because of the color of your skin. You should do this. You shouldn't think this way. You shouldn't believe this because of the color of your skin. The color of your skin defines you, is what that is saying. I don't agree with that, but that's what this liberal, socially accepted right now frame of mind is saying. And so we've got this frame of mind lately, especially because, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and when I was a child, I didn't think this way. I didn't know anyone who thought this way. Older people did think this way because they grew up in a time where there was still segregation and for the most part, people I don't think are alive today that were slaves, but a lot of people are still alive today that grew up when going to school. There were segregated schools, segregated bathrooms, all of that stuff. And I don't think it's a good time in our history to relive and celebrate, of course, but it is a part of history. And the importance of remembering history and learning about it and understanding how it happened, again, is understanding how not to let it happen again. It's the same thing that happens with socialism and with all kinds of different evils of this world, that we look at something and we say, that was just such a terrible thing. We can't ever let that happen again. But what's happening today is exactly the opposite. And it's because of cancel culture. It's because we're getting rid of everything. We're getting rid of history because liberals, they don't want you to remember what actually happened because it doesn't fit their narrative. So we've told young people, you're oppressed. It is the white man oppressing you. You need white men in the government to get you out of your oppression. But 5 or 6 years ago, that wasn't such a common thing that so many people thought that way and wanted to just go out and protest about this and burn down buildings and loot stores. It was something, I think, that you would say, no. That is what they used to tell people during segregation, right? They freed slaves, and then they still said, well, African American people are only 1/3 of a white person regarding voting, presidential voting, right? That's crazy. And nobody now thinks that's okay or acceptable. But at the time, it was a step in the right direction because you cannot get people overnight to go from one way of thinking to a complete different way of thinking, especially when it regards the economy and livelihoods. That was what slavery was in the South, and that's why so much of the Civil War divided North and South was because the South, it was their whole entire economy. The North didn't need it. And I'm not saying, again, that makes the North or South right or wrong. Obviously, there's people on both sides who didn't agree with it and weren't fighting for what their geographic location was fighting for. But overall, there was a reason behind this. It wasn't just all Southerners are so racist. It was their whole livelihoods, and these people had built it on this economy that was completely made up of African American slaves. And the way of thinking at that time was, during the Civil War, was sort of, you are oppressed because of white men, Southern white men. You need us, white men from the North, and the government to get you out of it. What's happening today? It's the same idea. You need white people. You need us to help you. But hold on. Because this is a step backwards in history. This is a step in the wrong direction. Black people don't need white people to help them. They don't need white people to pick them up out of poverty. And they especially don't need the government to do it for them. Because, I say this all the time, but I don't trust the government to do anything that I should be doing myself. I mean, the government can't do anything right or well. When they need work done for themselves, they don't even do it for themselves. They hire private contractors because the government doesn't do anything well. It's run on tax dollars, and they're either looking for the cheapest way to do something, which ends up being one of the worst, or they're looking for the most politically correct, the most politically motivated this direction or this direction way to do something. And again, not in the best interest of the people. So when we allow ourselves to believe, oh my gosh, we need the government, hold on. Do you remember when this last happened and we needed, people needed the government to fix it for them? They didn't need the government to fix it for them. African Americans fought in the Civil War. Slaves were freed with the help of other slaves and white people, and they fought in the Civil War, and they fought for freedom. They shouldn't have had to fight for it. I get that. But this is history. This is what happened. And we don't want to remember that, because if you remember that, you start to draw parallels. This is kind of some 1984 stuff, I feel like, with a lot of the statues being torn down and all of these things. History is so important. Tearing down statues, and again, we'll talk about the slave trader statue that they tore down. I think it was in England. It's a statue of a man named Edward Colston. We weren't celebrating his slave trading days. We were celebrating his philanthropy, which is a good thing, by the way. But anybody, and this is cancel culture for you, anybody who has a stain on their past that we don't like, canceled, get rid of them. Howard Stern, so many other comedians, I'm not really just singling him out, but that was just one I saw just super recently. He wore blackface in a video, and it's coming back to haunt him. And so many people are so angry over this, and he was like, I'm not going to apologize. And honestly, I am right there with him. It's okay for white chicks, right? That's on Netflix, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that movie. I've never seen it. It's probably super funny, but it's okay for black people to wear white concealer makeup coverage to make their skin look white, but it's wrong for white people to wear black makeup, anything to make their skin look black. Now listen, I don't think it's a very tasteful thing. Blackface is not really the same as white chicks, white makeup they had on. It's really not. I mean, for a lot of the older ones, especially pictures that I've seen, it's like black paint, like the color black. It's not like brown. So I don't think it's tasteful. I wouldn't ever wear that, especially if I was a comedian and I was going to be on TV or in photos wearing that. But again, it was more culturally and socially accepted 20, 30, 40, 50 even years ago when people wore this. These things that are coming back to haunt them, these photos and stuff, they're super old. So a stain in your past immediately gets you canceled today. You're a racist. Comedy isn't allowed to be funny anymore, and that's the problem because everything's offensive. And you can't just cancel something because you don't like it. If you don't like it, turn off the TV, don't look at the picture, unfollow them. Any of those things, feel free to do, but you don't cancel them, ruin their career, get them blacklisted because you don't like something that they did. Everybody's always going to be offended or annoyed or bothered by something that someone else does. But again, it's this history that we're forgetting, this way that we're bringing children up now. I mean, even when I was a kid, I was taught if something upsets you, you need to grow thicker skin. You don't just say, oh my gosh, it upsets me, and cry and complain and whine until somebody gets rid of the thing that upset you. But this is the problem with cancel culture. Because as we teach a whole new generation of young people that they should be offended by everything, and when they're offended, if they whine and cry the loudest or loud enough, then it's going to get fixed for them. If you complain enough and the government hears you, they'll fix it for you. They'll take care of you. Wow. But again, I mean, let's go back to 1984. This is like 1984 things happening here. It's indoctrination on a minor level, of course, but that's kind of where it starts. It's a minor level of indoctrination. We'll teach you that you need us, and we will slowly take away your history. We'll slowly take away things as you remember them, and we'll replace them with other happier things that we like, or a different variation of things. And I think like with Christopher Columbus now, I think they teach that a whole different way. And when I was a kid, we learned it as, this is Christopher Columbus. This guy was a free thinker. That is what we learned. And they don't teach you that at all anymore because I think that's so dangerous to them. I learned that Christopher Columbus was a free thinker. He didn't believe what everybody else believed about the earth being flat. He didn't believe that you could just fall off the earth, and he thought there was more to find. So he sailed away and he found something. And obviously he didn't find India like he hoped, but he found something, in my opinion, better for us, at least as Americans, for sure. And he found something that no one else had found before. Christopher Columbus was a free thinker. He was revolutionary for his time. But now they teach you he was a horrible person. He was terrible. Going against the grain, terrible thing. Don't be like him. And they use the excuse of Native Americans. And again, I mean, I don't think it's a great thing or a great part of our history. It's certainly a stain on it of how Native Americans were treated. And I won't say how we treated them because, again, I didn't do any of this. And when I learn about it, I think, wow, yeah, that's not okay. That wasn't good. They were treated unfairly, but it's not something I did. It's not something anyone from my generation did. So the best we can do is learn about it, understand how that came to be, and prevent something like that from happening in the future. But that's not what they want us to learn. That's not what cancel culture is about. Cancel culture tells us the only way to avoid this terrible thing, don't think for yourself. Don't be a revolutionary of your time. Do not do something other people would not do. Stick with the crowd. And again, this is so 1984. Stick with the crowd. Everybody has to do the same thing. You have to learn the same things. You have to earn the same money. You have to be treated the same way. Cancel culture is so dangerous because it allows us to get rid of history that is very important to remember, and it allows us to forget what has happened, things we should never forget. Instead of just saying, hey, let's learn about this. This is a stain on our past. This is a terrible thing. We need to prevent it from ever happening again. We just don't learn about it. That's a terrible way to prevent the past from repeating. I mean, they say history repeats itself. They don't say that for no reason. Remembering history, learning about it, understanding it is the way to prevent these horrible things from happening again. Not learning about it, not understanding it is the only way for a whole generation of young people to be kept in the dark, to think the same way, to be in this mindset of groupthink, to think that being different and not doing what everybody else is doing, not going with the crowd is wrong. But that's the way that the left wants you to think. If you enjoyed this episode, you can give me a thumbs up on YouTube, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and you can also check out my Instagram at right.this.way.